good afternoon, everyone. And whether you're joining in morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you happen to be here before the 4th of July holiday here in the US. And I'm Chris Torrence once again with another episode of Semi-Related. And today I have somewhat of a unique opportunity in terms of titles. We were just before off camera, we were talking about the role of a chief strategy officer. So without further ado, let me introduce our guest for today, Mr. Cole Stevens with Stevens Trucking. So Cole, welcome to the program, man. How you doing today?
Yeah, good. Thanks for having me, Chris. Like I said, similar titles. Love
What does it
love
mean?
sharing
Let's just start
this.
there real
Yes,
quick. Let's just get right. Let's go in deep real quick, Cole. What is a chief strategy officer? What is the primary objective? Can you do that in 2 sentences or less?
I'm still trying to figure out what a CSO does, right? That's half of my daily duty, right? Is to figure out what I'm up to, I guess. Trying to stay on the bleeding edge of different things, right? So if you do figure out what the title means,
I'll
definitely
let you know.
definitely
Yeah,
let me know.
I'm still searching. I think it's a great
But I
answer. We
guess
still don't know yet.
yeah, that's right. Exactly. I guess we're still strategizing about what that means, right? Still trying to figure it out.
Well said.
Just a lot of like you said, the front end things to do with our specific business, is what you
Yeah.
have to strategize and forecast and plan for. So, all those forward facing things within our business is really what I spend most of my time focused on. And anymore in the trucking business, it just kind of seems like you have to forecast further and further in advance. So,
Try to. Yeah.
yeah,
Well,
that's right.
that's a good segue, Cole. I know you're no stranger to the industry, and it looks like from if I had to guess, family-run business, right? So, also know you. I think you may have been a college athlete back in the day. Does that sound right?
I guess there's not much athleticism left here
If you
anymore.
make it to college collegiate level, I'd say you're selling yourself a little short there. So,
Yeah, I mean,
yeah,
I had, it was a great time, great experience getting to play some college ball. But hopefully I can just invest that into my children now, what I
yeah.
learned, right? So try to pass the torch on to them. Hopefully they get more of their mother's athleticism than their father's, as I always like to joke about.
Amen, man. I'm in the same category. My
I'm
wife's far more
just a
athletic.
brute, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Not much finesse in this body.
Well, you're looking a little more in shape than I am, man. That's why I go from like neck up on these things because I don't want people to see below. So, especially this time of year where it's summer and beach season, I just try not to scare the kids and the animals.
Yeah.
Look away,
Don't,
look away.
don't scare the kids, right? That's
No.
what, yeah. Yeah. I'm right there with you too. There.
Yeah, man. Well, Cole, like I said, man. So again, you have had a unique experience in the trucking space. So I did a little research, tried to anyway, and our man Jacob behind the camera there is always grateful for things he's able to share. And I know that I guess Stevens would be considered a family affair for all lack of for all intents and purposes. Is that an accurate statement? No, it's starting with your dad, or maybe even further
Yeah.
back. From your perspective,
Yeah.
how did all this kind of get in? How did trucking become an integral part of your life, your professional life, and maybe even beyond?
Yeah. So, I'll give you a little quick rundown of Dad's story, a
Yeah.
little bit more personal than like most people probably know. So his entire family was bricklayers by trade, and he was the youngest child of, I believe, 8 or 9 children. And his dad just taught them how to work, and he actually started laying brick at a very young age. That probably wouldn't be appropriate to say how young he actually started working for his father. And so he worked up to having his own crew, and he was about, I think, 17, 18 years old. And, whenever really bad winters hit here in Oklahoma, it was the winter of 77 to 78. And then they had another one in 78 to 79. Like he said, he was about to completely starve out. And he was like, I can't do this anymore, right? So he sold his bricklaying equipment and signed his crew over to his older brother. And that was enough for a down payment for his first 1-ton pickup truck. And he was like, I'm going to get into the hot shop business. I'm going to drive a truck and just bust it. And as he tells the story, he was the long-haired hippie kid in the industry, 19 years old, freshly 19. He was almost just 18. And back then it was just a commercial chauffeur's license. It wasn't even an
Yeah.
actual CDL, pre-deregulation and all the
Right.
states taking over all the CDL stuff. And, like he said, he hauled more stuff in the floorboard of his pickup than he did on the bed of it, just because he had to get this, get the scraps and really earn his stripes. And so, the first almost 20 years was strictly oil field with
Mm-hmm.
hot shotting. And then, he just took that JIT, just in time delivery service, from the oil field into the general freight sector, just doing it, himself. And we've grown to, almost 500 employees, 400 tractors, 1,700 dry vans, and the oil field flatbed is still, very much a part of us. But we've just taken that level of service that's, to the minute that an oil rig demands and has for
Yeah.
50 years. Right. And, he's getting ready to celebrate his 45-year anniversary on July 26th, which is pretty cool,
Very
for a
cool.
19-year-old kid that didn't know what he was getting into.
That's a legacy. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah. He's a special guy.
So
That's for
Cole, you're
sure.
growing up in that environment. I mean, at a certain age, you probably it's vague memories and stuff. But what age? I mean, you're growing up, and that's just in your blood at this point. I think that's fair to say. Did
Yeah.
you always, growing up, did you say, "Hey, I love what Dad's doing. I want to continue this legacy he's created"? And was it always your ambition to kind of take the reins at some point, or did you kind of have a less than linear path and kind of checked out a few other things and just ultimately decided to go down this path?
Absolutely less than linear.
Yeah.
Trucking is a very hard industry. The asset side of trucking and trying to manage the finances of all that.
Yeah.
And something that's 24/7 as the oil field was, with the way that he kind of broke out into the industry, and then the way that it is today, kind of with like the Amazon effect, as people call
Mhm.
it, with e-commerce and, consumer demands and things like that, where people want it and they want it right now. He honestly, like, never forced anything on us. I mean, I grew up coming up to the terminal, playing pool with truck drivers
Oh
when I
yeah.
was 8 years old, and hanging out, in the smoky driver's room, right, in the lounge.
Know it well.
Most people probably wouldn't allow that today, but when mom's got other stuff to do, and dad's out making a run, or he's out, supervising a full, rig move or something like that back then, you got to do what you got to do, right? And so I think it was more of the work ethic, right, that me
Yeah.
and my other two brothers just like watched him do. And that's something that, like, he's never wavered from, right? He always told us when we were growing up that he really didn't care what we did, because he knew what he was building, right? And he didn't want to put pressure on us to feel like we had to step into any type of certain role.
Hmm.
And he always told us, boys, you can be a grave digger, but you better be the best grave digger that the world's ever seen. I just want you to work hard at whatever you're doing. And I ended up going to college, getting my degree. So did my brothers. And then we actually just all independently found our way into the family business, and
Hmm.
like into our various segments. So actually my older brother, Eric, is our chief business officer. So he does a
Very
lot of, driver recruitment, general management, HR type functions. So the internal things that face the drivers. And then my oldest brother, Chad, is actually our COO. So he's over all
okay.
of operations when it comes to the shop,
Yeah.
every bit of the equipment, all those different types of things when it comes to the operations. And then I kind of overlay with like the sales and strategy and technology. So we kind of fit the three main pillars of like what it takes to run an asset company. And we just, we ultimately just follow dad's lead, right? So it's pretty special to get to work with, your two brothers and your dad, still getting to lead all of us, kind of through the trenches of what trucking brings, especially in a market like this, right?
Yeah. I mean, I mean, I mean, you hear about the American dream. Is it still alive? And, I like to think it is, right? I think stories like this with your
Yeah.
family, your siblings, your father, are indicative of it can happen. But it goes back to maybe we've gotten away from just, it's not an entitled thing. It's work ethic it's the core principles that I try to instill in my son. And you got kids, right? So
Yeah.
it's, and Cole, how did you mentioned the various roles and the hats that your brothers are wearing.
Yeah.
How did you guys, was that organic too, to just kind of go, hey, Cole's kind of got the sales, the gift of gab, or,
Yeah.
and one's got more of like just a maybe more quantitative minded on the business side? Is that, did it
Yeah.
kind of just naturally happen? Did you
Yeah.
guys, any
Absolutely. And
friction there? Just, yeah.
my oldest brother Chad literally started out detailing trucks. I mean, like
Yeah.
as low as you can get in the company, right? Like literally scraping out wheels and
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Like doing some of the dirtier things, cleaning out trucks and some of that type of stuff. And got into operations and learning maintenance and all those different
Yeah.
types of things. And he's very much like a puzzle. He loves puzzles and putting those pieces of the puzzle together, which makes him a great operator. And
Hmm.
then, you know, my older brother Eric started out hammering the phones as an internal recruiter, right? And has just worked his way up through that segment of the business internally when it comes to building the rapport with our entire fleet. So like
Yeah.
honestly, a really good portion of our fleet was recruited by my brother, right? And so like that's pretty cool to be like, hey, I still have that relationship with Eric Stevens, right?
Yeah.
You know, and same kind of thing. I started off as a donut delivery boy, right? You know, hitting oil field machine shop starting at 5 o'clock in the morning in Oklahoma City before we really put the push to diversify into dry van freight. And you know, when you start out and you learn it from the ground up, and like, honestly, your dad's not going to hand you anything just because
Yeah.
of who you are, and he wants you to learn that for a reason, because that's why he's been successful, is
Sure.
because he learned everything from the ground up. Like if there was a wrench to turn, he turned it on his rig. He was an owner operator. If there was a cell to be made, he made the cell. And as he added people on internally, like becoming his own HR director, you know what I mean? Like he's done every facet of a business starting from an owner operator. And so
Yeah.
like that's what he wanted us to learn, because if not, you know, you kind of don't really understand what's ingrained at the ground level of your business. You know, it's taken years to get to this point. My oldest brother Chad's been here for coming up on 25 years.
Yeah.
Older brother Eric's been here for 11, and I'm coming up on 9. I mean, so,
Okay.
you know, we don't know everything about trucking by any means, Chris. We get humbled and taught new lessons every single
Yes,
day.
sir.
But you know, we're very fortunate to have some experience in the industry for times like this, quite frankly. Whenever it takes a dip, this really isn't our first down cycle for any of us, honestly.
Yeah. Yeah. In my 25 years, markets are cyclical. And I think that
Yeah.
it's funny coming out of the COVID era, right? Where cash in, hand over fist, right? You see some of the younger folks, I've talked to that thought that, this is the best thing ever, right? Now
Yeah,
it's
it's
like,
easy, right? It's
right. The
easy
last
when the
few
money's
years,
there.
now the phone's not ringing anymore. What's going on here? So I think it's always great. Perspective is a keyword I use a lot, and just being able to have that, just ride out the roller coaster known as trucking and just freight cycles in general. So,
Yeah.
Cole, when you were as you and your brothers are kind of coming up in this, do you think that where are some areas that maybe like dad just doesn't get this technology thing, or he just do you still maybe today run into those scenarios where there's an old school mentality and a new school, and it's not a right
Yeah.
or wrong. I think there's merit to
Yeah.
both. How do you
Absolutely.
and your brothers that again tell dad, hey dad, I know we've always done it this way, and maybe there's merit to some of that.
Yeah.
How do you weave in the way the market, technology, just so much has changed over the course of his career and even yours at almost a
Mhm.
decade in? How do
Yeah.
you kind of what does a staff meeting look like with the Stevens family there on staff meeting day when ideas are being thrown out there? How's
Staff meeting day is usually
it?
over dinner at the family house on
Even
Sunday.
better, yeah.
Right. Yeah. It's pretty informal, but we're usually plugged into the business all the time. Right.
Yeah.
Um, you know, he's very receptive. Like I always have to give him credit on, you know, even the fact that he's been doing this for coming up on, you know, 45 years. Like he's just incredibly receptive to like what works, right? So like
Mm-hmm.
if you can lay out the numbers to him, and you can also tell him how you're going to do change management processes and a full roadmap on like how you're going to execute on that strategy or that plan, he's all ears, right? There's like sometimes he's got to do a little bit more research on how the technology works, but like he's so stinking sharp. Like he
Yeah.
is, you know, I tell people all the time, he is genuinely a savant with numbers. I mean, like he was blessed to have a brilliant numbers mind, which fits very well in the trucking space. And
Sure.
so typically, if the numbers make sense in his mind and you can wrap around how it's going to affect your business and mainly your people, he's very new school in that sense and very receptive. But you got to also know too, he's going to ask you a lot of questions, and typically he already knows the answer to the question that he's asking you, and he's asking you for a reason to kind of prod and see if you've done your research enough
Sure.
to really be proposing a big change like that. And that's something that like we've learned about each other is like don't just go ask dad, hey, does this just sound cool and great? Because he's so busy doing other major things within the business that like it just adds more plate and more to his plate and takes more energy away from him.
Yeah.
Like you really have to do your research, and that's what he wants you to bring him is like genuine opportunities that have been vetted, not just what ifs that he's going to end up having to spend more time making a decision on, right? He wants solutions to problems, and he wants to know that you vetted those technologies and things
Right.
that could help solve modern day problems with a modern day solution versus just more of the old school methods. I
Yeah.
always have to give him credit as a leader. He's great when it comes to that. I mean, he used to just have the Nokia like brick phone, as we call it, where you could play Snake up until
Oh
like
yeah.
seriously when I started, like probably almost 9 years ago. He was still rocking the brick Nokia phone, and we always gave him a ton of grief about how he was so far behind on technology and things. But it's funny because he's like, he'll go through those cycles too, which is funny with trucking, where he finds something that he likes and he'll stick with it. But he was one of the first people to have a cell phone, like my
Yeah.
mother tells me, like because he wanted to be on the cutting edge back in whatever it was, I guess the 80s, where literally like he lugged around a suitcase
Yeah.
and like he had the cell phone that was like a giant brick where he's
Yeah.
lugging around this suitcase. So like he will get ahead of the curve, sometimes, and then sometimes me and Eric and Chad are sometimes saying, hey, the curve's it's coming up a little quicker than we thought, and he always jumps right back ahead of us too. He's very spry and young at heart, so we're super lucky to get to follow his lead.
Yeah, that's a very commendable. I mean, everything I'm hearing about him sounds like just a remarkable person, individual, not just
Oh,
trucking,
he's the
just
best,
across the
man. I'm
board.
telling
Yeah.
you, like there's no better person than, I mean, like he got his faults, right?
We're human. Yeah.
That's right. He's
Yeah.
definitely a human being, and he'd be the first person to tell you. But like when it comes to how he's wired for this business and the way he thinks about things, like he is just a different breed of animal, and he's just like he handles things with grace even in super stressful times. And he takes those, like I said, the new technologies and things that are changed that most people put their walls at. He's like, okay, I'll listen to it if you know what you're talking
Mhm.
about, right? But you better come correct whenever you bring it to my table, because like he's going to hit you with some really hard questions,
Love it.
and you better know what you're talking about.
And Nicole, I think that probably and again, having you and your siblings there to kind of be in the room is helpful because I think there's this misconception that these trucking is got a bunch of old gray silver foxes out there, and you go to some of these conferences, and that honestly, that's a lot of what you do see.
Yeah.
But I do think that trucking, and I mean the asset side, right?
Yeah.
I've got more and more exposure to that side.
Mhm.
There's, I'm learning there's definitely like don't undercut this idea that these people aren't thinking ahead because
Whoops. Sorry.
no, you're good, you're good.
My automatic light went off. There we go.
Oh, there you
Sorry
go.
about that, Chris.
Clap, clap. You got to clap on, clap
Yeah,
on.
give it the wave. Give it the wave back. Yeah, exactly. Sorry about that.
No, you're good. I think there's this big I think again, coming from I've spent some time with some big 3PLs and brokerages,
Mhm.
very transactional. I think there's this, it was enlightening to me when I got in more of the asset side of, just the capital intensity, just the cost to run a unit, a power
Yep.
unit, the trailers, the maintenance, the driver recruiting, retention, all
Yep.
that is like, there's the things that a transactional broker doesn't really think about.
Yeah.
So the fact that he's gone this far and you've seen how many, I mean, even this year, unfortunately, maybe even riding out the rest of this calendar year, there's a lot of bigger players we're seeing in the headlines, right? They're just calling it quits.
Yep.
how do you think the resilience within Stevens throughout the, late 70s from inception on up
Yeah,
to today, what has enabled the company not only to survive, but to grow and to thrive and to expand from that one truck back in the day to,
yeah.
what do you say, 500 trucks and double or triple that in the amount of trailers? What do you attribute to that longevity of Stevens Trucking?
I just think back to like, dad making the gravedigger comment, right?
Yeah.
Just like it didn't matter what we did, you just better work really, really hard. And that's the thing, is that like this industry is 24/7, 365. And obviously you can't sit here and, act like the macho man that you're going to work 24/7, 365. But I can honestly say every family member is involved or touches the business 7 days a week, even if that's maybe for an hour on a Sunday or whatever. Like we're very plugged in because this is all of our livelihood, right? It's kind of sink or swim in a manner. So it's not one of those things where it's just a piece of our family in terms of like, hey, we can go do something else because, my brother Bob over here, he owns a roofing company, so I can go to work with
Yeah.
him and just spool this up, right? It's like, no, this is literally what every member of our family does every single day. So you better figure it out. And sometimes that means staying up here till midnight. That means
Yeah.
waking back up the next morning after you stayed up at the terminal till midnight at 4 a.m. to get back at it again, right? Like I think I've told a few people, not many, but during COVID when the world shut down, like I was legitimately in the office 92 days straight, right? And we didn't lay off a single person. And we're super proud of that. And
Yeah, you should be.
that gave us the head start too, right? For what became the COVID boom, because
Yeah.
it's cyclical, right? It goes up, down, left, right, sideways, whatever direction you can ever imagine. And so that's basically what we told ourselves, is like, we can just grind through this. We have no idea what is happening just in the world, back in 2020. But if we could just grind through it, right, and work harder than our competitor, like we'll survive and we'll be fine. And
Yeah.
we did, right? And honestly, like that's what dad did by himself. That's what dad did, when my oldest brother Chad started, and that's what he did when Eric started. And that's what, he's done since all of us have been here. Is when times get tough, you just roll your sleeves up, you put in a little bit of extra hours, you think even more critically, right?
Yeah.
And you just grind through it, because there's always light at the end of the tunnel. The
That's right.
cycle comes back. It's one of the most like, it's one of the most intricate businesses, I feel, because it's tied to the supply chain, but it's also super simple because it's really just supply and demand economics, right? The price is going to go up if there's less trucks on the road and more tonnage moving, and vice versa, right?
Yeah.
It's pretty simple. The price is going to go down if there's more trucks to haul it, fighting for lower tonnage,
Yeah.
compared to the trucks on the road and the capacity, as everyone calls it, right?
That's right.
It's really, it's become very intricate and faster and more dynamic. And there's some amazing technologies out there that are speeding things up even faster, but it's still simplistic with the way that like you make or lose money. It's
Yeah.
really not, you know what I mean? Like
Start with your
still,
operating ratio, right? If you can if your OR is good, then that's probably indicative that the company's doing all right. All
bingo.
things considered. Yeah.
That's exactly right. And you can, you manage that on a quarterly, a monthly, a weekly, and a daily basis, right? And you look at, all the different moving parts, and as long as you're staying up on the right side of that, then you're okay, right? Supply and
Yeah.
demand economics.
Cole, how do you look, and again, trucking and traditionally is, there's been periods where trucking was deemed as a very, honorable profession. I still believe it is.
Yeah.
The optics have changed. The demographics have changed. We've heard driver shortage, and then we've heard, it's just a quality driver shortage. The number of drivers, whether they're, foreign immigrants that are starting to kind of come into the picture.
Mhm.
There's been a lot of changes, and that's just the world, right? That's society.
Yeah.
What has been the biggest enlightening things that you've seen in your 9 years? And again, I've already asked your brothers or even your father.
Yeah.
That'd probably be a pretty long-winded answer.
Yeah.
But just when you look at the profession of trucking, if you're involved in, interviewing, you mentioned even as a kid, you were in the break room playing around with the trucking drivers. What has changed? Is there any major trends you've seen in in any facet of the driver community as a whole throughout your progression over at Stevens?
Yeah, something that I like really actually enjoy seeing, right, is like the cultural shift of appreciating more home time, right? From
Hmm.
more of
You
that
bet.
like old school, but like don't take that for the fact that like they're not some of the hardest working people in the country, if not the
Yeah.
world, honestly, because the hours that they put in and the sacrifices that they make away from their family and things, I definitely appreciate all the sacrifices that they make in this profession, because being an over the road truck driver is not for the faint of heart when it comes to how much the world's changed too, just since I've been in this seat, right? Texting and driving is a legitimate epidemic, right? And our drivers get to face that every single day. So like, it'd be the equivalent of me sitting at my computer and then someone comes in and blows an air horn every couple minutes, right? And throws me a
Good
curveball.
analogy.
And I'm
Good
trying to
analogy.
do the same job I've been doing, which is drive the truck down the road. But now there's these additional headwinds, right? That our drivers have to face out on the road every single day
Yeah.
that they honestly didn't have to. Population's higher than it was probably 45 years ago, right? Whenever my
Yeah.
father started the company. So you talk about traffic
Oh,
and navigating some of those different things. And also too, just again, how, it's the same time as it's always been, Chris, right? Time I think is our perception of what it is with how much everything is speeding up.
that's right.
But, with the pull forward of e-commerce through COVID and again, consumer demands and things, I've seen that change so much. And so, we have a choice as to, do we just pass that stressor along to the driver, or do we try to really coach them and give them the best tools and also use the best tools internally, like those technologies, to better plan our drivers, plan the routes that they're going to be traveling, so that it's more optimal, quite frankly,
Hmm.
to their work schedule and all these different types of things, versus, hey, just grid it out. You got to get this load there because the
Yeah.
customer's honest about it, right? Like, obviously every once in a while it happens where you're like, hey, this is a really hot load. We appreciate the customer success, right? We got to make them successful or else we wouldn't be in
That's
business.
right.
But also sometimes your admin team has to absorb that a little bit,
Hmm.
because those drivers are facing so much more than they ever have. I mean, as a skilled labor force, it's amazing. They're driving supercomputers down the road,
Yeah.
and,
Effectively.
and and all the digital gauges and things in their face now. And again, like their own personal electronic devices, much less again what they're facing externally with other people. That's a lot.
Right.
That's a lot of moving parts to throw at someone. It's not as simple as just, well, they just hop in the truck and they go down the road, right? Throw in your pre-trip, your post-trip, all these DOT regulations, stopping at the scale house. Like that stuff didn't really exist at the scale
It
that it's at.
wasn't enforced. It might have
No,
been
yeah, that's
somewhat
what I mean.
stated. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No ELDs, no
Yep.
even inspection week was probably pretty light, right?
Yep.
So that
That's
is
exactly right.
that's the byproduct of a heavily regulated industry, right? For right, wrong, or indifferent, right?
That's right.
So
Yeah.
yeah.
Regardless of where you stand on it, I can't do anything to change it. And so you have to figure out how to operate within it. And so that's the thing, is like, trying to aid your drivers to be able to do that is like how we try to win every single day. But it's really tough because they keep getting more and more things thrown at them from kind of every angle, whether it's the civilian vehicle on the road
Yeah.
or whatever. We're all not really being as present as we used to be. And that's been a huge shift that I've seen, that, it kind of breaks my heart a little bit for our driver force, because they don't get enough credit, I think, for how tough that job really is. Because I mean, I'm sure there's been a time or two, Chris, on my way home or probably on your way home, that we've gotten a little bit of like, yeah, come on, buddy, you know what I mean? Like really texting and driving out there, and those guys are driving an 80,000 pound loaded truck, and they're working, right? They're trying to earn a living. So if someone cuts them off, or they get in a side swipe accident, that pulls out of their pocket for what they can earn and bring home to their family. And I just feel like, those outside external sources are so much tougher than they've ever been for these guys.
I think you nailed it, man. We're just distracted. Where our attention spans are dwindling. I think it's interesting too if you were to talk to an older population of very seasoned veteran drivers
Yeah.
with a new breed, the next gen.
Yeah.
There's so many differences in just the way they're life is working in terms of just, again, the tech, social media,
Mhm.
communications, and 24/7 news cycles, all that, right? So it
Yeah.
does beg the question, like, have we made it more frustrating and complicated? Even though the intent was to make things smoother and easier, we've gone too far, and now we're distracted all the time and overloaded with information. And obviously that distracts from the idea of like the safety and the driver just saying, look, if you trust me as the driver, like I'll communicate. I
Yep.
know that's important,
Mhm.
but I feel like we've maybe gone too far in that direction. And now, like, you go back, we were talking earlier about when I was talking to another customer, and they were talking about even on the white collar, the corporate jobs, where
Mhm.
they're trying to attract talent, but they're working off old software and they want to get this new like tech talent. And
Yeah.
they're coming in and saying, "Hey, like, what are you working on, right? Like, what is
Mhm.
this system? I don't even what was this written in? What programming language,
Yep.
right?" So they're dealing with that, wanting to get the most like these new gen that are coming in there going, my phone is sexier than your entire TMS, module.
Yeah.
But the driver, on the other hand, is kind of like, with all that the upside that comes with that. I feel like there's probably like I said, I think there's a point where it's almost just a hindrance on their ability to do their job correctly. So
Yeah.
I would love to be a fly on the wall in those driver break rooms when the old school's telling the new school, and back when we did, and that's fun.
Yeah.
That's always a fun conversation. But the reality is, I wonder with this new generation, do they want a check call? Are they just like, are they looking at it where everything is automated? I don't want to be distracted, or maybe they do. And do they want to? Are they still lonely? And it begs the question: the OTR romanticized lifestyle of being on the road 3 weeks out of the month or whatever that looks like.
Mhm.
I'm with you, man. I look at us. I'm like, I'm ready to get home after a long day.
Yeah.
I know you are too, and I think society and the average citizen, at least in this country, right? We just don't appreciate that sacrifice on every level. And I think during, when there's a driver shortage is ruling the headlines and the markets during COVID, driver appreciations left and right. We love our drivers. Now we look at it, we're not quite seeing that level of support.
Yep.
And that
Absolutely.
saddens me too, because this
Yeah.
is not a cyclical thing. This should be happening all the time. And I believe there are good people in this industry that see that and acknowledge
Mhm.
that on a regular basis. But at large, I feel like it just goes by the wayside, like other initiatives when times get tougher, right? Things
Yeah.
it's different.
It,
So
it hurts to attract talent just in general to the industry. Because if someone's looking at jumping into trucking, they see the headline of the nuclear verdict and they read
yeah,
into it and they're like, is that really what it should have been? And that doesn't seem very fair. And do I want to insert myself
right.
into an industry that gets treated like that by the general public? I would venture to say probably not, right? I could probably talk for
Oh,
the
that's a
rest.
great. I
I
think
could
this is.
probably talk for the rest of the week about that topic.
Yeah. And you feel
But
it viscerally because you're surrounded by it as, as a trucking owner, and
yeah,
seeing all that goes along in the front and the back
yeah.
end. So
Well,
yeah.
and we were there pre-COVID
Yeah.
and kind of had that chip on your shoulder per se, with kind of feeling like, your employees are forgotten kind of in the shadows
Yeah.
of America, right? And then all of a sudden it became, hey, truck drivers are America's heroes, right? And it's kind of gotten back to feeling a little bit lost in the shadows, right? And
Yeah.
that breaks your heart for your people because their job hasn't stopped. It's, again, I think, gotten harder. And honestly, more underappreciated for the lives that we get to live as Americans, with things just magically appearing at our front door,
Right.
with how intricate and amazing that our supply chain is. It still works off of the backs of, truck drivers,
Right.
pilots, right? Warehouse workers, forklift drivers, like those people in the supply chain that are picking things up, moving them, getting them from point A to point B. There's lots of things that are, done by machines and robotics now when it comes to the actual manufacturing, but like the movement and mobility of this country is incredible, and it still works off of really, really hardworking blue collar people. And it hurts. It hurts to
Yeah.
watch, you know what I mean? Like people that, are like your uncle, right? And,
Right.
and to know that, they kind of have to be perfect on the road to be viewed as that. And people still culturally have a bit of like, oh, well, trucking is just, it's bad. It's so
It gets a bad rap.
dangerous.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it
Yeah.
does. It absolutely does, and like I tell people, I love data, all the data, right? you are 6 times more likely to be in an injury or fatality crash with a civilian vehicle than you are with a commercial vehicle, right?
Right.
They're obviously more severe because of the size of them with the commercial vehicle, but the per 100 million miles points towards civilians are way more dangerous in our own vehicles. People are texting
100%.
and driving, they're driving with their feet up, right?
Yep.
But the one time that that person gets in a wreck and there's a name on the side of that truck, right? The
That's the
media is
headline.
all
Yeah.
over it, right?
Yeah.
And that's the headline, but they don't realize how many billions of miles that, commercial vehicles travel, every single, week, month, day,
Yeah.
right? Across this country. And the fact that like these people are at work, like this is their job. And that doesn't mean that there's not bad actors out there, right? There's plenty of
That's
them.
everywhere though, right?
That's
The kind
right.
of
That's
trucking
exactly
thing. That's
right.
yeah.
There's
Yeah.
people that work on computers that like to hack people, right?
As we see. Yeah.
That doesn't mean that every single person that gets a computer science degree is an angel, but it also doesn't make them terrible people, right? There's good and bad in every single industry. It just makes me sad that like holistically, it's a really great industry with a lot of really, really good people that do the right things day in and day out, but they get a bad reputation just by a
Yeah.
few bad actors, just because it's so public, right? Something happens in a warehouse, not many people see it, right? If there's an injury or something, it's very contained for quality control. But if there's something that happens with one of our vehicles, it's clearly on the open road. And we know that liability, right? I never want to discredit that, Chris, that like we don't obviously realize that, if something happens, it can literally alter someone else's life. I mean, that is legitimately like,
Sure.
I think about
There's
it
a
every
huge risk.
single
Yeah.
day. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like we said, I have 3 children and a wife and nephews, that are on the road every single day. So like, it's something that crosses my mind every single day and like never is, discounted with like what we do can be incredibly dangerous. Because it involves the general motoring public, and we do understand that, which is why we take safety so seriously at our company. Like that's
Yeah.
not just lip service. Like our safety team is incredible, but it also hurts whenever you know how hard your people work, behind the scenes, and how hard your drivers work to be extra safe with all the emerging technology out there. And then they still get a bit of a bad reputation by the general public. It's like, man, would love for people to be able to take a ride and watch these people work compared to like, if you're honest with yourself, compared to what you do on the road, you know what I mean? Like people blowing through emails, YouTube and TikTok, and
Yeah.
you know what I
Yeah.
mean? And you're like, be realistic, right?
Well,
These
I hate
people
to say, like, COVID was a good wake up call, at least in my family. And I often say people didn't really know what my family, Thanksgiving dinner, like, what do you do again? I know that's definitely not an issue in your family, but mine, it
yeah,
happens to not be in the trucking space. So,
yeah,
I think it took a toilet paper shortage for my family in other goods during that period to really wake
yeah.
up and understand supply chain, trucking, logistics. We take it for granted. It's the air we breathe until it's not there.
That's right.
And now we've gotten spoiled with e-com and Amazon, and I want to have it in 2 hours. I want that item on my front doorstep. But they have
Yeah,
no idea what goes on in the background to make that happen. And I think
yeah,
I won't keep going down this tangent. I know we could, Cole, but
yeah.
I would love for society at large to really think about how do you think that pick up any inanimate object in your office or mine or anywhere, right?
Mhm.
There's a high probability that at some point it was on a truck before it got to you or the
Yeah,
retail outlet or the grocery store, whatever.
yeah,
So I just wish people would think about that and be grateful other than just driver appreciation week to say
yeah.
like, this is going on 24/7, 365, and you
Mhm.
don't even notice it. And then you have the audacity to complain because the guy's, he's not moving as fast at the red light and you're
Yeah.
cutting him off at the ramp or
Bingo.
the exit. And it's just it
So,
my wife's always say, you always let those trucks over. I'm like, you know why? Because I
yeah.
know I have a different level of knowledge and appreciation for what
Mhm.
they're doing. So,
Exactly.
um,
Well, and they may be 9 hours into a shift, right?
right.
You know what I mean? And it's like,
Yeah.
yeah, they're tired, even though your day's just now starting out. They've been delivering goods overnight. Whoops. Oh, bless. I need a, I don't know why this, I need to
That's
wait.
technology for you. It's
That's right.
energy
Exactly.
efficiency.
That's
Yeah.
technology. That's why we got to vet it, because it's great. It's great whenever it works, but not great whenever it doesn't, right?
We rely on it a little too much sometimes, I think.
That's
But
right. Yeah. But you know, there's nothing that gets my blood boiling like someone, cutting off a semi or
Yeah.
doing some of these different types of things because it's also dangerous for the person that's doing it, not thinking about it, right? And it's like, that was an 80,000 pound rocket moving
Yeah.
60, 65 miles
And
per
it
hour.
can't brake on a dime or turn on a dime or make a
You
lane
can't
change.
brake
Like,
as
think
fast
about
as
it.
you
Yeah.
can. That's
There's
exactly
physics
right.
involved that I wish people understood. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like
Yeah.
even though you think you're being this tough guy and cutting them off and making them slow down or doing whatever, it's like, no, you're legitimately endangering yourself, even
Correct.
though hopefully that driver stops, right? And is able to slow down. They can't always. I mean, I wish people could just get a
I
chance
know.
to drive a truck just to know what it feels like to have that much weight behind you and to not be able to stop on a dime when you're used to driving like that every day as a regular civilian vehicle. Um, but it gets my blood boiling sometimes.
I'm with you, man. I'm with, and only people in the space will probably appreciate that.
Yeah,
But maybe, and I don't want to make any assumptions, but I'm hopeful that even at the federal level and just across the industry, that there's more exposure to just the sacrifices made on every level. And as a civilian population that relies on the backbone of commerce, that's what we're talking
yeah,
about here. It is the
yeah,
backbone of commerce. That if
yeah.
it weren't for these men and women out there that I assure you, your trip to the Targets, the WalMarts, or your local grocery store would be a different experience. And
Well, and
don't take it for granted.
you
Yeah,
gotta be empathetic to the fact that that semi you might cut off in your road rage
yeah,
moment might be carrying the milk for your children, right? And it's like, but then
exactly.
you get to the grocery store and you're mad because the shelf isn't stocked, but it's because the load's
Yeah.
late because he got in a fender bender 10 minutes after you cut him off,
Right.
and he's not there to deliver the milk. And that's one of those things where people just don't think that through with how like lean our supply chain really is.
Yeah.
And like, I think that they kind of underappreciate a lot of the time because the shelves are always stocked, right? But during COVID, I think that was the ultimate wake up call was like, I mean, I can honestly say, right? I had a small child at that point and had a child right in the middle of COVID in 2020. Um, there's no more of a helpless feeling in the world than going in to get formula in a
Yeah.
store
That was a big one. Yeah.
out,
Yeah.
right? Like thinking there's not food for my
What's the
child,
alternative? Yeah.
basically.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Right.
And you go to 20 different stores and you eventually find it. But what happens if you couldn't at all, right? And
Yeah.
it's like, that's a very, like, I don't know, almost primal instinct of fear of like, what would you do? And I think that's what woke a lot of people up. But we just slid right back
It's
into,
human nature. We're interesting creatures. We really
yeah,
are.
very
We're
interesting. I think
and
we're
I,
pretty awesome
unfortunately
though.
we've gotten away from a lot of what the values and the principles that your dad and my dad I think instilled in
Yeah,
us.
yeah,
And I think that's somehow gotten missing. And that's
yeah.
unfortunate because the impact of just the mentality alone
Yeah.
is invaluable to be able to have that level of appreciation. And well, we
Well,
could
would you,
talk about this forever, Cole. I'm
oh
sure.
yeah, I
I
definitely
mean,
could talk about that. Yeah,
this is something that I think is it's you can tell we're passionate, get a little emotional about it because it's
yeah,
because you deal with it. I've been exposed to it. I have a CDL. I've been in the military. I got to drive a flatbed for a bit, so have witnessed that firsthand, and now have to always step back and remember that, right? So,
yeah,
but shifting gears, Cole, tell us a little bit more about Stevens. Now we got the backstory.
yeah,
We know that there's a lot of e-com. I've heard you mention that a few times. So
yeah.
that sounds like, and some drop in hooks I've heard are a big part of the network. Tell us a little bit more about, about Stevens. Like, what are you, let's fast forward to today. What is Stevens working on? What's the footprint? Give us a little more context to what the company's doing.
Yeah, so I mean, we still are in the general truckload dry van space. We do a lot of the drop and hook, kind of hub and spoke
Mm-hmm.
method of sourcing kind of like outbound domiciled freight out of like a
Mm-hmm.
metro area, and then trying to backhaul those one-way loads with other customer freight, and really try to optimize that and make those match up. That's how we remain profitable, right? We're probably 85% contract freight, and usually the 15% that we're exposed to the spot market is just trying to get those trucks
Yeah.
back in the network somewhere. Obviously being based here in Oklahoma City, we do a lot in the central US,
Hmm.
so Oklahoma, Texas, Arkansas, Kansas, Colorado. And then, we do a lot of automotive. And so
Okay.
we'll go to the upper Midwest, Michigan, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, Wisconsin area. And then we do also the Southeast region. So like Georgia,
Yeah. Pretty big
Tennessee,
footprint. Yeah.
Carolinas. Yep. So there's a lot of, you know, paper goods and all
Yep.
sorts of different things that kind of flow in that area of the country. And we do a little bit of everything, Chris, right? Like I said, automotive, consumer paper goods, recycled paper, pallets, retail, food and beverage, like you name it.
Pretty
Um,
diverse mix. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, there's a really good, mix within our portfolio, which was very intentional for times like this, right? Because, you just don't know what can shut down at any given moment,
Yeah.
just like what
As we've
happened during
learned.
COVID, right? Exactly. Like certain
Yeah.
things stayed open and certain things completely shut down. And so we put a really big push on as a family to try to diversify our portfolio and customer base and also geographic area that we service.
Hmm.
Because, just say all we did was run freight from Oklahoma City to Houston, right? What happens if a major hurricane hits Houston, God forbid, right?
Hmm.
Basically shuts down your whole company if you're not diversified enough and you're just doing the exact same thing, right? And so we've taken that approach to kind of every facet of our business is to just try to stay diversified within the segments that we service, the exact customers. We don't have a single customer that's in double digits as a percentage of our business, right?
Right.
Which we kind of pride ourselves on because we have a limit with people, and then we try to add on for other people so that we're not putting too many eggs into one basket, right?
Yeah.
And in today's business world, that's just how you have to operate,
Yeah.
right? And same thing, if things get super slow with automotive, we're super lucky that, we're on the back end of a lot of things that go into home building, right? Well, home building
Yeah.
has been slow for the past,
That's right.
really 14 months, right? You know, compared to COVID, right? I
Sure.
mean,
Sure.
still not crazy
It's not the
slow,
greatest
right?
comparative benchmark as COVID for anything, right?
It's
It's
so hard. Yeah, that's a whole nother thing we could
yeah,
talk about for hours, Chris, is the
that's right.
fact that
That's right.
COVID messed up a lot of historical data points, especially for our business since we've been growing a lot. It's hard to
Yeah,
compare to anything. And you're
I
kind of,
know. It's an anomaly. And I
yeah,
think we'll look back in history and go, there's different periods throughout the cycles, but this one's been the COVID, that period, that era has been more pronounced on the high on the highs and lows, right? I think that goes
yeah.
without saying. And unfortunately, we've hit the cliff and we've been in the downward spiral for a while. So yeah, what are you seeing? I know I don't want to make any bold predictions myself. There is no crystal ball, but you hear some of the pundits and thought leaders
Yeah.
within industry. From what you're seeing there on the front lines at Stevens, do you any predictions? Are you guys already starting to see that we hit the bottom in your opinion? Are we still dragging along the bottom? Do you see some signs of hope?
I,
What are your overall thoughts?
I definitely do with the basic, supply and demand economics, right? You can't really put your thumb on any one specific number or
Yeah.
data point, right? And I follow all the major pundits, right? That
Yeah.
they all have the predictions. There's bears and there's bulls everywhere, right? And some of them are going to be right, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's going to go up or down or
That's right.
sideways, and someone's saying that out there. And you know, we just try to keep our finger on the pulse from a standpoint of kind of kind of the nuanced things. I'm not phrase that quite, but like, you know, maybe the response that you get from a broker, right? 6 months ago, maybe didn't even get an email reply. And now when you hit them back with a rate, they're like, well, can you do it for this rate? And it's higher than what it was, right? So like that to me at scale, when you're maybe booking a spot load, says that spot freight is up. I mean, obviously, like we have kind of almost any pricing tool you could imagine running the fleet that we do, which is amazing. And I do follow all those, right? And some of them have a longer lag than others and whatnot. Um, but sometimes it just boils down to, okay, what is the sentiment that we're getting back from our trading partners too, right? Because
Yeah.
maybe the sector that we're in more so is busier because maybe automotive genuinely is busier right now. And so if we're heavier in that, like Cole Stevens has a sentiment that, man, the market's it's taken up. but maybe the
Yeah.
person that's in food and beverage is like, I'm dying over
I'm not
here,
seeing that.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
like, to me, it's very individual on the mix of freight that you use and your driver mix and like where they're domiciled out
Yeah.
of and all those different types of things, I think feed into, like the reality that you're living as an asset company can be much different. And
That's right.
I've got a lot of like respected peers that I lean on within the industry that are other trucking company owners, and you get a different answer from every single one of them because maybe one of them wasn't busy, because they're in X sector where the other one has been doing cross border and has been
Mm-hmm.
busy for the
Yeah.
past 2 years. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And it's like,
Yeah.
it's a really big sandbox to play in, right? There's a lot of freight that moves in this country. Again, just back to the hard work. You just got to work really hard to turn those stones over and try to find the absolute best. And that's how you kind of, beat your competition per se and win those customers over in the long run is just by getting down in the weeds, right?
Mm-hmm.
And showing those customers that, you're going to service them at a cost effective price. And that's what keeps them
Yeah.
in the door. But in terms of like actual my seat seeing uptick, absolutely. I've seen it really since 2 weeks before Memorial Day. So it's been
Okay.
about 6 weeks of a pretty good pop in terms of like some of the short hop rates,
Mm-hmm.
on 200-mile segments have been much better. But that's a lot of places like the Southeast region and Central, where
Yeah.
honestly the Midwest is actually still pretty weak, right?
Yeah.
In comparison to the percentage uptick that we've seen maybe in the Carolinas or Georgia
Sure.
or Texas, Oklahoma compared to Ohio, Michigan, right?
Yeah. Right. Right. Right.
So again, it's hard to say the whole market's back, and that's what I've been trying to like tell our team on the pricing side of things and on forecasting is like it's probably going to be pretty splotchy, right? It's
Yeah.
kind of like a thunderstorm moving in. It doesn't this huge blob doesn't just appear out of nowhere. Kind of starts trickling up a little bit here and there, and the next thing you know, you're in the middle of a storm, and vice versa, right? You know what I mean? It's kind of splotchy across that U.S. map before it becomes a full blown boom or
Boom.
bust,
Yeah.
whichever way the
Right.
market's going. You know what I mean? It
Right.
doesn't happen overnight, but that's where I've been trying to keep our team, very motivated to, be like, hey, we're seeing this pop here, but then you got a planner in this region that's like, I'm dying. You know what I mean? And you got to keep them even keeled and motivated to know
Yes.
that it's not going to happen everywhere all at once,
All at
unless
once. Yeah.
again there was a black swan event like
Right.
COVID that no one
That's
could
right.
plan for, right? And I mean, right? No, I don't know
Still
anyone.
early in hurricane season. We got
Yeah,
weather. Yeah, we got weather's always a factor.
yeah,
Logistic. It's again, we're talking about the physical world. That's what I try to tell people. It's like there's a lot of things, and again, work in the optimization space currently and tech. There's things that we can always try to leverage data and predictions and forecasting, and with to some level of accuracy. But when you talk about just all the things that unfold every day, that we could have never envisioned, and it just so it really is like yeah, you'd love to be able to say we can prevent those things from happening or, but I think the reality is that how do we become more resilient when things inevitably do happen? And I'm
mhm,
hopeful, and that kind of segues into some of the technology conversation I wanted to have with you. How is Stevens viewing, and that kind of ties into it. And again, there's a couple of facets, here we could talk about there's productivity, there's optimization, there's efficiency gains that again, as a vendor in tech, I always tell people, like, I'm not trying to somehow proclaim that optimization is going to magically solve everything. It's a hard problem. It's arguably the hardest
yeah,
problem. But what I am trying to say is and I'm a former operator. I would have never gotten into my role without having to either have a CDL, sit in a planner, sit in operations, account management, integrations, you name it, right? Customer service,
yeah,
all that. Just wanted to learn the game, and not just at one company, but from a variety of different companies to try to say I
yeah,
have a really 360 view. And all I can come up with is technology is there and it does serve a tremendous purpose when deployed correctly, when there's
yes,
process involved, the people feel a part of that.
hmm
But I often see that a lot of tech vendors are working under this massive fallacy that this industry is so far behind and we're a bunch of idiots running around knuckle draggers, right? We just don't get it. And you
Yeah.
got this great degree and you're out in you're on the Bay Area and you just know trucking. And
Yeah.
it just frustrates me and again, I say this, I'm self-deprecating myself and technology, because I think there's a huge miss there by tech people that really just think they just make these false assumptions.
Yeah.
And so what I want to ask you is, when it comes to tech, what is your approach for Stevens, for Cole, for your brothers, when you guys are looking at, hey, we know that our competitors are probably looking into tech at a minimum, they may even be investing in various technologies that enable them to maybe work faster or hard. I won't say harder, maybe
Yeah.
faster, because they have tools, they're equipped with things that make their job a little bit more efficient. But when
Yeah.
you look at Stevens, when vendors come to you inevitably, what is your approach to how you evaluate them? Do you start with problems and just try to evaluate as many as possible? I mean, just give me some color on, there's a myriad of tech players solving
Yeah.
a myriad of different use cases. But
Mhm.
when you're encountered with bombarded with all those DMs and emails, how do you guys, as the nucleus of the leadership team, make that determination on what makes sense for Stevens Trucking right now?
I think a lot of that kind of comes from exactly where we're at in this point in time as a business, right? You know, somebody could send me a message 6 months ago that, you know what I mean? I'm like, oh, that's not really much of a fit.
Yeah.
It doesn't get much of a response. And then fast forward to today and where the company's at, it's like, that's exactly what we need, right? And I've forgotten about that opportunity, right? That the selling of technology moves just as fast as the technology itself, it seems like nowadays, right? And
Yeah.
so keeping up with like what all's coming out and like the macro trends, I think, is a huge piece to our business, because to your point, there's so many opportunities out there and there's so many different players that you can't chase too many rabbits and come up
Yeah.
empty-handed, right? You kind of, as Dad always says, at the end of the night, sometimes you just got to pick a dancing partner, right? And
Yeah.
just go with it. And who we're looking out for those partnerships and to be those technology vendors is very specific to like where we're at. Maybe we just implemented something a year and a half ago that was this huge undertaking, and
Yeah.
we don't want to put any more energy or capital expenditures toward switching something off of that. But then that current vendor could do something catastrophic and
Yeah.
ruin a relationship that changes that tomorrow, right?
Right.
Um, it's vetting, it's a lot of, like you said, figuring out what our internal problems are. And is this something that we can see, solving that problem? And also too, there's kind of a bit of the Warren Buffett theory of we're investing in that company in a sense, right? Like I'm giving you my capital. This is not just like, hey, you give me this technology and it's going to solve all my problems for me,
Yeah.
right? So I really like to get to know the people, right, with the technology company that I'm going to be working with. That to me means more than anything, right? Because again,
Yeah. Glad you said that. Yeah.
people are what solve the problems, because like just the change management alone can take
It's a
6 months to
steep
a year implementing a new technology. So the technology is not doing all that implementing itself already. You're dealing with people trying to get the implementation up and going. And so like, if I don't have that trust and that
Yeah.
relationship with you, that like when something goes wrong, because it's not just an if, it
It's a
is a
matter of
when
when.
something
It's a when.
goes wrong, right? Something's going to go down. There's going to be a glitch, whatever. I want to be able to pick up the phone and call and say, hey, Chris,
Yeah.
I really need you. This is affecting me. How can I help you
Yeah.
from my end get this done? And then are we going to work this thing out together to solve a problem on this partnership, right? Because if we're adding it on as a technology to our business, it's clearly a core piece of our business. So we can't afford for something to go broken. And
Yes.
that's what people I think forget is, there's this amazing technology out there. There's this fully automated thing, and I'm just going to click this button and boom, everything's going to be
So,
gone.
yeah.
Not at all. Like even the world's most advanced automation processes, you know, they still take a lot of like configuration, a lot of modeling, a lot of rules creation that are all specific to our team and our business. And it's great, but that's a heavy lift for my people too. And that's another I mean, I'll be the first person to admit, and like you said, be self-deprecating. Like I can throw things at people with the best of them, right? Like I can look at 20 different things at one time and be like, gosh, that sounds great, right? Like have a
Yeah.
positive mindset, like, man, that sounds amazing. And I made the mistake before, right? With my
Yeah.
team of throwing too much at them to where they like want to go home and throw their hands up because they're like, I've had enough of the change, right? And again, that comes down to the time because
Yeah.
there are times to change, but there's also times to just focus on your internal processes and your people and, maybe look at the previous implementation of a technology that went good or bad and take a bit of a breather from looking at other technologies. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I know it sounds crazy, but like,
No, not at all.
sometimes your people are just like, hey, I'm tired. You know what I mean? And like, we've already implemented A, B, and C in the past 2 years. Like, why are we looking at implementing D, right?
Right.
And, that's another thing that again, and my answer can change with the evidence presented to me and the timing of kind of that evidence. Because I may be looking at accounting software, right, 1 week, and then something totally throws that up to where I'm
Yeah.
looking at some, tracking or some
Yeah.
email automation for customer success based on what happened today
Right.
or yesterday. You know what I
Right.
mean? And it
Right. Right.
totally
Right.
changes my prioritization for like why I'm looking at something. Um, but typically it's I like to joke, it's the noise factor, it's the
A lot of
squeaky
noise. The
squeaky
minutia, the
wheel
noise.
getting
Yeah.
greased, right? If there's
Yeah.
enough substance and like really, I would say credible people that are like presenting things to me and it becomes repetitive. I'm like, all right, let's really take a look. Here's some things I've looked at over the past year. Here's like 3 really good options. Let's take a deep dive and I'll start gathering up internally those kind of like who I think is going to be the internal champion, who might be the
Hmm.
person that sees that process through if it's in their department. And then that's who I'm going to really take, that director level person's
Yeah.
insight and whether or not they think it's a good idea to really move forward with it. Because there's nothing worse than trying to launch a technology when you don't have your people's buy-in. And I've done it. So I failed at that miserably multiple times,
Welcome to the
right?
club.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. And it's
Yeah.
like, there's nothing worse at scale than falling flat on your face when like that, you presented it to your dad, who's the boss, and you're like, man, this thing's gonna be the best
Home
thing
run.
since sliced
Yeah.
bread, right? And then 6 months later, he's like, "Where are we at with that?" And you're like,
Yeah.
"It crashed and burned, man. Sorry."
Yeah. Yeah. Cole, how do you I want to kind of touch on that for a minute, and I often say it's one thing to be sitting in the ivory tower at the corporate, your level
Yeah.
and say, I see this company from a different lens than a lot of other folks down in the worker bee frontline there, right?
Yeah.
How do you, when you, as a guy, a strategist, and you're kind of, again, keeping in touch with, got a great pulse on the trends, the markets, technology, it could be anything. How do you go and really get that support and evangelize things that you feel are important at your level, but also be able to explain the why we're doing this,
Mhm.
how it's going to work and benefit you, hopefully. And there's a change management aspect to that, and not get your troops to feel that, with AI and automation, there's naturally an array of emotions, right? I mentioned earlier, anybody out there that's selling AI and automation, they're inevitably going to run into some level of resistance
Yep.
because people, rightfully so, have an array of emotions, and ultimately they feel like they see where it's going in other areas and they say, is this our job?
Mhm.
How do you go about conveying and articulating that message of this is what's good for Stevens Trucking? We have to, as a business, for all of us, we have to be able to maintain a certain level of cost of doing business, which changes. How do you express that to those folks that may have some apprehension or just, again, pure resistance
Yeah.
to that when you're engaging in those discussions?
I'll be honest, Chris. I'm a pretty simple guy, right? I'm not
Well,
like
if you're a guy, you already simples are Nate.
that's
We're
right.
male.
That's exactly right. Then get more simple than this right
Yeah.
here. You know, I'm very fortunate that I've got some really good technology advisors that broke things down into layman's terms for me, because I'm not a programmer or a developer, right? I know some of the basics enough to be a little dangerous with, how things work and things of that nature, but I'm by no means a computer engineer or anything of that nature, right?
You need it. Yeah.
But a guy told me he owns a very successful development company, and he was talking about AI. And I was like, what's this all about? I mean, like, just teach me about
Right.
really what AI is in layman's terms, because he built the company from the ground up, and he was like, you know, think of Henry Ford and the auto manufacturing line. He's like, that was all manual labor, and then eventually human beings built the tools that build the tools, right? And he said,
Yeah.
that's all AI is. We built
The
this
tool. Yeah.
technology that we use, but now we're building technology that builds other technologies,
That's
right?
right. That's
And
right.
so I'm a very visual learner, and I always just envision a tool. You know what I mean? It's like, I've got this hammer here, right? But if I teach my person, how to use the jackhammer, right? Like, you know what I mean? I'm always viewing it in that space within our org, because again, it's people driven. So the more I can like literally put myself in a mindset of I'm helping a person physically build something, that is what aids me whenever I'm talking and communicating to them with like, hey, this is just another tool,
Yeah.
right? This is just something else. You know, it's not a hammer. It's a very intricate hammer, and it's getting more intricate, but that skilled labor, we're
Yeah.
still just a bunch of people out here working using some form of tool or hammer. And now we're just going to have tools that help us build even more intricate tools,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
And so like, I think that makes it a little bit less scary
Yeah.
for them. And again, I couldn't sit here and tell you how all that stuff works with blockchain and all these things, but I've learned how it affects my business, right?
Yeah.
And that's what I want to convey to our people is like, here's how we can use this technology again, and you mirror that kind of with the definition of a tool, because
Mhm.
that's what we use. We use computers and things. It's a mobile business, right? We're using trucks as actual tools, but we're also, in order to move those, we're using this technology on our computer, to be able to do that, to be able to communicate, to be able to run bidding and pricing that gets
Yeah.
us every bit of that work, right? And so I just think in those terms, it's less abrasive to the people.
Yeah.
And also, I had a really cool experience to sit down with a C-suite member at Walmart not long after I started in this industry. It was total happenstance. And he said, Cole, Walmart wouldn't be Walmart without IBM, and IBM wouldn't be IBM without Walmart. It takes a
Yeah.
really good partnership of technology companies marrying together with an actual use case in a business that needs
Yeah.
that technology. And that's when you get really special output of both the people using the tech and then also the people that are able to sell that technology to the user. And that just like, it just kind of changed my mindset, because I'm the same with like, I grew up son of a truck driver, who carried a brick
Yeah.
phone, back to that,
Yeah.
right? And so I'm thinking like, do you really need all this technology? But once I stopped viewing it in an abrasive manner, it kind
Yeah.
of helped my mindset a little bit to be like, all right, that's where I'm looking at this is like, I'm going to do everything with my energy and power to search out the best partners that are going to be my IBM, because I can't make all that by myself.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And that's where it's
I
like
do. Yeah.
get ingrained with some really good technology partners, and get to know their business and get to know them, and then trust that they're going to take care of you, and you're going to be their Walmart, right?
Right. Do you think you mentioned it, Cole? And I'm glad you did, because the people component, right? I think there's this, when I go to ATA and TCA, other big trucking associations, you can see there's different groups that some are just so traditional and they're almost just very skeptical of technologies, probably for good reason. They've been burned or they've been promised the world and it didn't come to fruition. So it's based on their own experience. Then there's others, like I said, the tech companies that have zero domain experience in trucking or logistics, but they understand algorithms and they just see the world through a completely different lens. So it sounds like you might be like me of like, hey, you're both right and you're both wrong, right? Like another one of my ethos again is this idea of it's not a man over here and machine over here and we're competing. It's this harmonization and balancing act, right?
Right.
So when you think in that through that lens, what can technology vendors do better when they're going into trucking in particular, asset-based trucking? Because you can go into the shipper world and have a different experience, and any other industry or sector in business and have a different experience. when we talk about trucking, what can vendors do that are, you know, these founders coming up with ideas, whether they're really new ideas or just some regurgitation of something else, whatever,
Yeah.
irrelevant.
Mm-hmm.
What's your recommendation suggestion? So when people, even from like salespeople, they're like, hey, you're in somebody's here. I'm Cole Stevens, chief strategy at Stevens Trucking. What can they do a better job? Whether it's that initial outreach, whether it's the engagement, whether it's just understanding your business, the people. There's so many facets to it. But again,
Yeah.
what idea? There's people listening to this. I guarantee they're like, oh man, Stevens, I'd love to work with them. I'm going to start. Let's get Cole's email or his phone number or his LinkedIn. All. What are you going to tell them? If you really want to get my attention, do ABC. What does that look like?
I think the number one, capital A, is customer discovery, right? I mean, like, you know, if you talk to any startup, and that's like, I love listening to somebody like Jeff Bezos talk, right? He was just always in that startup mentality and that innovative mentality.
Always day one. Yeah.
It's always day one, right? That's exactly right. And so, you know, you can listen to the podcast and whatnot and you know, think that you're really doing that right. But genuinely, where the rubber meets the road is getting out and doing that customer discovery. That's where, like, I want people that want to know what my problems are. They're not going to tell me what my problems are because that's what they think, right? And again, there's some really great technology solutions already out there and that are built. But if there was someone new that's like looking to pivot or any of that type of stuff, I'd say genuinely ask your customer what their pain points are, and then repeat that 100 times over if that's your target audience, right? If that's the customer you're going after, is like, hey, I'm going after a trucking company. I want to be in the asset space versus the brokerage space, right? I've learned enough to know that there's a lot of similarities, but there's also a lot of differences. I want to go after 100 Cole Stevens. Go talk to 100 of them and just ask them, what keeps you up at night? Because I can promise you, like, it may end up only being 10%, but 10's better than zero, right? Trying to sell something that nobody needs versus asking those 100 people and getting a 10% response rate. And those 10, you really build your product off of solving their problem, right? I mean, it's very simplistic, but like the most successful technology companies that I've gotten to work with over my years, that's what they do. And those are the people that we still use because they come to me and they say, hey, here's my idea, right? And, you know, maybe we've got this product, but I think we could tweak it in this manner. What do you think? And like, is that something that it sounds like you really need? And I'll give them an honest answer. If it's not what I need at the time, nope. But I'll also always give away my intellectual property. It's hard to even tie my name to anything intellectual, Chris, but like
and feedback,
anything of that nature, I'll give you my opinion at least, right?
It's subjective as a footnote, but
yes. And like, I will tell you honestly, like, hey, that's a good idea, or I don't know that that's going to be well received, right? And again, I may be the one out of 100 that's only my opinion, and you got 9 other people that had a totally 180, and that's perfectly fine. Go with the 9, right? That's okay.
That's
you know
okay.
what I mean? Like, maybe I'm doing something totally backwards. But customer discovery is like the ultimate that I think so many people just get out and they start building, and then they're like, hey, look at this that I built. And everyone's looking like, I mean, that looks pretty cool, but I don't know if I can use that. You know what I mean? And it's like, if you just spent more time and energy in the initial sell of like, hey, what do you need? Very simple. And that's how I start my sell. And like, I'm not selling a technology. I'm just selling our trucking services. Is here's what we can do. And if you don't like that, here's maybe some changes that we can make. Maybe we can do drop and hook. Maybe we can offer yard hostling services or whatever to bundle with that. Here's what I think I could solve for you, but also please tell me what your needs are. And then I'll go back to the drawing board and see if that's something that I can figure out. And that's where the honest back and forth relationship starts with like, this is what I can do, right? Like I can't lie to someone and be like, you know what? Load up 140-foot containers that I don't own and ship them intermodal, and I'm going to get into competition with JB Hunt tomorrow.
Good luck.
It's not going to turn out well. But that's what, like, that sounds crazy, but that's what a lot of technology companies, because you can't see what's going on behind that curtain. That's kind of what they do. You know what I mean? It's
Yeah.
like, hey man, I'll build that for you. And then it's like, well, do you have the capability to build that? Do you know if enough people really want that to like make it a sustainable business model? Or like, are you just diving into this with like no idea what you're getting yourself into? Right. And again, back to the visual, I like to make those like mental
Show
images,
me. Yeah.
almost memes in my head of like, what would it look like if I went and bought 140-foot containers, and would that really pan out well for my customer? And the answer is probably not.
Yeah.
So when conversations start to like digress into that, no matter the vendor, that's not just technology, right? If it starts to sound like, man, this sounds like something off the wall for you and me, we should probably just squash this conversation and maybe pick up a year from now. And that's okay, right? Like there's nothing wrong with passing on an opportunity if it's not the right opportunity for both parties.
That's right. I like how I've said this before, but I had an old boss when he said, there's two winners in every deal, no matter what that engagement is. And it's the obvious is who gets the deal, the contract. And the other winner is the one that realizes right away, this is not sounding like we're a fit, and walks away first and doesn't try to waste time and force fit it. That's a win, because a lot of these companies spend a lot of time trying to force fit things and ideas that, just to your point earlier, if only you had really engaged your ideal customer profile, some people like Cole, and gotten that feedback before you went all in on a product, and only to realize that everyone's kind of like, this isn't what we thought. This is not what we need. So I am 100% with you. And I wish more companies, and I hope if you're listening, will really adhere to your advice on really understand the problem. And that's, the onus falls on both parties, right? It's as a customer in this case, and as a vendor or a carrier versus their customer at, at a shipper, manufacturer, et cetera. Like, you really, those are such imperative conversations that I think often just, we call it discovery, but what is a discovery? I don't want it to be a, 20 PowerPoint slides of how great your company is. I don't care, right? Let's get down to it. I don't even use PowerPoints anymore. I told my boss the other day, I said, hey, I think it's supplemental follow-up material as a brochure, but let's not waste 30 minutes of 29 of 30 minutes going through slide. It's like, I'm like, dig into the product, show them what we're doing, ask for feedback, see if that's a good use of time. And I think people appreciate it. So Cole, when you're thinking about the new technologies that are constantly in the headlines and coming out, what do you feel like from a category perspective, where you're trucking right now? Are we still trying to figure out like the TMS game? Are we moved into like, is visibility table stakes now? As we talk about back office automation of accounting and those type of functions, optimization, AI, there's so many different, paths that we can talk about. And just for you, Cole, where do you feel the real opportunity? And I'm talking about, maybe it's going right now, maybe it's in the next few years. Where's the next big trend? Do you feel like maybe it's in procurement? Maybe, we talk about cost and service. If that's back to the basics, how are we doing? We got to improve cost, improve service. But from just, again, a categorical standpoint, where do you feel like the big, whether it's now or in the near future, where is that in your mind? There's no right or wrong answer.
I'll give you the typical political answer, Chris, right? It's a little
Stevens.
Right. Exactly. Hold on. Let me stand up on my box. It's a little bit of all of the ones you just touched on, I think, kind of rapidly happening at the same time, right? Because there are so many players in the space that it's dependent on who your customer is, because they drive everything that we do. And so certain customers are obsessed with the automated tracking and tracing, right? And some people are obsessed with the way that they absorb the data, which is more toward the TMS, right? And so it's one of those questions too. A lot of software still requires hardware. You know what I mean? And so like, you've got a ELD, you've got to look at the investment in hardware on your trailer tracking and like who you're picking that dance partner with there. And so again, it goes back to what I said earlier in terms of, for me personally, right? What is that prioritization? What is the most important and urgent that come together at the same time with like, hey, customer number one on your revenue comes in and says, this is my priority. Cole Stevens' priorities just changed from what they were yesterday. You know what I mean? And so like, that's just the cold hard truth that we're so customer driven. But by the same token, we're here to serve our employees as well. And so the ultimate immovable object versus unstoppable force, right? Is if at the same time customer number one comes in and tells me that, my driver force comes in and says, if you do this, you'll quit. Well, then we've got
That's
a
me.
real decision to make here,
Yeah.
right? And I know that sounds crazy off the wall, but there's some level of that balancing act that happens between the external customer and the internal driver force that you always have to like take into consideration when you look at what you're forecasting is going to be the next big trend. Because again, it takes a long time to like implement something new. And so we want to be right when we're looking at what do I think is the next right move?
Yeah.
Is it, should I wait right now because I think it's going to be an 18-month thing that they're working on this incredible TMS system, right? Or is there this new safety camera technology that's going to be out in 6 months, right? We can't do all of it at one time. And so that's where you try to have a firm footing on like what is coming and when, and then it can change too, right? Like, you get a call and somebody's like, hey, we didn't make it, we ran out of funding or something, right? As a startup, and that's what I mean. Yeah. It happens to super old trucking companies and mega
as we read.
brokerages, right? I mean, it's heartbreaking to literally look at the news right now for me. Because I know a lot of these people and it's not been fun, but those are the obstacles on the roadmap that you have to seriously take into consideration, because to your point, Chris, like you're not just investing capital into them, you're investing your time and energy. And when you're kind of in that leadership circle, it becomes that much more valuable because, and not to say like, oh yeah, my time is just so valuable, but like it's time that I can be focusing on another project that really affects 500 people, right? And that's something to not be taken lightly, that maybe I could have spent more time communicating to my director level people what needed to be communicating versus going down this rabbit hole. And now I'm beating myself up over the fact that maybe we're out of sorts on the operations side because I didn't tell my people what was going on because I was so busy over here looking at every technology known to mankind. You know what I mean? My personal opinion, I think it's going to be the automation of the AI is what's going to be incredible to overlay with existing technologies, right? That's what I see being like a game changer over the next 3 to 5 years is like who can focus on automating those processes with what's already in place at logistics and supply chain and transportation companies, right? Because that's what's so cool about transportation is like, I don't know a single one that's the same. Like when it comes to hardware, software you're running, geographic area, your customer mix, there's just so much that's different that if you can automate the integrations via AI, that to me is like, oh man, because that's what takes so much time is like, I got to implement this telematics into this TMS system, and then this TMS system absorbs this from this customer this way. To me, the AI used to create seamless integrations via like APIs and different things like that, I know nothing about the technology. I've just heard a little bit about what's coming.
Conceptually, you're just, it's less painful, right? I think that's, it is, there's no, like, it's inevitably in any engagement, right? At some point, it's, let's talk about the integration. It's like, ooh.
That's always.
Tell me an integration that goes flawlessly. I don't think I've used integration and flawlessly in the same sentence ever. And I think there's a reason for that. And I agree that there's a huge opportunity. I know companies that are trying to work on that. But when we talk about the nature of, and again, right, wrong, or different, there were companies that have surfaced over the last century, if not longer, and they've become legacy. And now there's new players. And yet, guess what? It's not one switch that you just flip to old and new. How do you blend them together? And that gets hard, right? And I'm not technical enough to really understand the depths, but I do know enough like you probably to go, that just sounds like a massive undertaking with lots of risk. And like you said, it's not a matter of if things will derail at some point to some extent. It's just a matter of when. and how do we recover and get past it? So
One,
I
and
love that.
your customer blend too, that's still external in this
Yeah.
line of work, is also all the way across the spectrum of like
Right.
highly integrated, multi-billion-dollar conglomerate down to like Jim over here that runs a flower shop and still calls you to send you a load.
Yeah.
That's a big spread. And so like, again, to me, automating those integrations with existing processes is where I feel like the pinnacle of like emerging tech and AI it is going to like really shine through over the next 3 to 5 years.
I hope you're right. I think I'm very bullish on exactly what you're stating. I just think there's more layers to it than just on the surface of what, you know, an API sounds great, but then again, you're only as strong as your weakest trading partner. Like you said, the flower shop guy that's like, what's an API? What is EDI? I just call. And I think that's the learning curve. And I'm sure every industry to some extent experiences that spectrum. But man, I tell you what, trucking, transportation, logistics, it is as pronounced as I can imagine. Just that full spectrum, right? So I'm with you, Cole. I'm optimistic. There are days I'm not so optimistic, but overall, we just push through. And again, we're talking about the backbone of commerce. So people tend to forget we can't just stop. Like, let's just time out and figure this out. Like, that's when the grocery store shelves get empty real quick.
Bingo.
And that's life, sustaining life and whatnot, right? So let's be realistic. So I'm with you, man. I think the absorption rate of this industry we're starting to really understand what is, again, it's feasibility. What right now, and that's why I ask folks like yourself when I talk to them, I go, you know, it's all subjective, and you're right. Well, if you're over in the Fortune 100 versus down in the small mid-market, there's a different answer, and rightly so. But I look at trucking as a whole, and there's a lot of people that, you know, post deregulation that, you know, even with data right now, there's so many data, the standardization and governance of data is often a core problem, I believe, because I integrate with Stevens Trucking, and then I got to go to another player, and they define it a little differently. And you talk about people that do EDI mapping or integration work, and they, you know, we make it sound easy, and they're like, no, there's so much specs and customization and schemas and all that goes into it. So, you know, I often wonder if we can have the greatest automation and tech products in the world, but if we can't figure out some level and agree on what data is, right? We can't even agree on that. It's an appointment time. Is that a time? Is that a window? Is that on time? I don't know. And that's the complexities that we're all dealing with. And I don't know that there's an easy answer. I don't think there is, but we're trying, right?
And that's how I view it too, right? Again, back to like the visual image is like, it's kind of like building a home, right? If you can't communicate properly with your subcontractors, they can have the greatest tool ever created, which is just like a technology. But it's amazing how many problems get solved with proper, or how many problems get created with improper communication, right? Probably ask anybody that walks the face of the earth, and communication is pretty important, right? And to your point,
I believe
that data is basically a language on how someone says something or how they hear it, right? And that's what I always try to look at, is like that back and forth. That's all that really is, but they are different. You know what I mean? And every single person you're talking to is like they're speaking their own different little nuanced version of a language, and some of them are speaking something totally different. And you've got to learn that. Yeah, exactly. And so, like, you know, it's amazing, to your point, how much goes back to communication, whether it's technology to technology or people to people, right? And that's what it boils down to. And I think, again, if someone can help solve and streamline that and stay really focused on that, and like look at that as a huge problem, because it's always the biggest problem, right? How you say something. You can say the same sentence and you say it a little bit different with tone, it means something entirely different, right? And it can cause great things, or it can cause catastrophic things with the way you say stuff, right?
100%. Yes.
And so I think if people view that and they carry that weight and are like, man, I think I could help with a technology like that and really help focus on the communication, I think it'll be a really special place within the supply. Exactly. I think it'll be a really big win for, you know, a possible founder out there that's looking at, where do I want to insert myself into the logistics and supply chain space within technology? I think that's a good place to start, in my opinion.
Well said. Well, Cole, I could keep talking to you, buddy, for gosh, I got baseball practice, soccer, but whatever the
Yeah,
night
we could.
agenda holds. We got a
Yeah,
holiday
and
coming up,
yeah,
so yeah, let's just get before I let you go, man. Any
yeah.
cool plans for the holiday? What are you staying local there? You guys got some travel plans? What's
We're
on the
just
agenda?
hanging out,
Yeah,
probably
yeah,
gonna pop some firecrackers,
yeah,
try to keep all of the fingers attached.
yeah.
Got the
Keep the
three.
kiddos entertained. That's
Yeah, keep them
safely, safely.
entertained safely. Exactly. Dad might like to set off some serious fireworks every once in a while, and
Perhaps,
so does.
hypothetically, yeah,
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, maybe. Yeah, maybe talking about a friend. Don't know.
yeah,
But we're just going to be hanging out and just try to enjoy time and obviously
yeah.
celebrate. The fact that we're free to do so and
Yes,
appreciate what people have sacrificed and what this holiday represents. And
yeah.
I love the fact that we're in an industry that to me is a super all American staple of an industry in
I
this.
don't know. It gets more patriotic than trucking. I
That's
really
what I
don't.
mean. Like, obviously our US military is absolutely out there on the front lines, but like on the home front, truck
You get some
drivers
work.
just,
Yeah,
man, you know what I mean? They really sacrifice a lot. And every industry feels that way, I'm sure, about themselves, right? Man, those drivers sacrifice a lot so that we can live a very, very luxurious lifestyle. So I'm just fortunate and blessed and thankful that I live in such a friggin' awesome country. You know what I mean?
yeah. I'm with you,
That
Matt.
that our infrastructure and our supply chain is so intricate compared to other places in the world, and that we get to live the way that we do. It's just incredibly like humbling
We're
and
grateful. Got to be
that's
grateful.
what I
Yeah.
mean. Completely blessed and grateful that that Thursday night I'm gonna get to hang out with my kids in a
Hmm.
in a safe area, and that doesn't go you know that doesn't go unnoticed from somebody like me, right? And
Yeah.
unappreciated for the sacrifices that people
Well,
have
and the
made.
onus is dads. We've got to, just like your dad or my father passed it on to us. We've got to be able to instill that work ethic, that
Yeah,
national, the patriotism. I think I see it. I don't. Again, I'm biased. You're biased. We're in
yeah,
this industry, but I do think it's hard. I'm going to put up an argument against anybody that says they have a more patriotic industry than ours.
yeah,
And I hope they remember that next time they're on the way to see family for this holiday and they get behind a semi or, and they're that I hope they just take that moment and think about you've got time off. You're going to spend some really quality time with your family, but
yeah,
look over across on that other lane
yeah,
and see that driver who's not able to do that and
yeah,
just pause, right?
yeah.
Just think about it. And
That's
if everybody could just take that just moment of reflection, I think we'll be in a better place in general because there's an
absolutely.
effect that happens when people start to, really appreciate those things and
Yeah,
show it.
yeah.
So
And that
I'm
goes for
hopeful.
every industry. You know what I mean? It's like we get stuck arguing about things, and we got our Zoom meeting, and I'm sitting in my comfy chair,
I know
you
air
know,
conditioning, God,
all
yeah,
online air
yeah,
conditioned, and there's literally a soldier out there that's sacrificing, his or her life, and
yeah.
not just life, but their family's livelihoods and the way that they live their life, so that I can sit in my comfy chair in my air conditioning and have the freedoms that I have and celebrate the things that I want to celebrate, along with somebody who may be a 180 completely different from me living in this country that wants to
Right.
celebrate something different. That's what's beautiful to me
Well, I
about
hope
what
this
we go
country can
on.
figure. Hopefully, I wish more people could think like that about. And I'm not going to go on a political tangent, but just the idea of, hey, that's the whole point of this nation and what
Yep.
Independence Day is about is the ability for us to have differing opinions.
Bingo.
I'm just hopeful people will start to say it doesn't mean you have to. There's this sentiment of hate and
Yeah.
unwillingness to listen and like, look,
Yep.
that's not what the forefathers had in mind. And
Yeah.
I think you and I are definitely very aligned in that mindset. So,
Yeah.
well, Carl, look, man, I appreciate it. I know you
Well,
probably got
Chris,
some,
thank you so much.
yeah, man,
Yeah.
likewise. I'm hopeful to see, how do people reach you, Cole, final step before I let you run? How can they learn more about Cole, about your family, about your company, or just
I'm
give a
on
plug?
LinkedIn. I mean, I'm going to be
Okay.
honest. I don't really put a lot out on regular, social media.
Social. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Or you can just come up here and I'll probably be at work. So if you want to come
Ah,
to Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, and just, pop into the terminal and,
yeah.
say hi to the whole family. Absolutely.
Well, I'm going to hold you to that because Jacob's a fellow Oklahoman, so I
Oh
think he's
yeah,
gonna. I think
that's right.
there could be. We'll absolutely. A state I've been to a few times, but never enough quality time. So
Well,
I'll see if we can get
you
something.
need to get
Yeah,
down here and
you
come
bet.
hang out with me and Jacob, because, it's pretty.
Best tour guides ever.
That's right. That's right. We'll show you the ropes out here in Oklahoma.
There you go. Well, Cole, thanks again. And thanks everybody for tuning in. And yeah, everybody have a great holiday weekend. Be safe out there. And again, as Cole has eloquently expressed, please take a moment to reflect on those men and women, whether they be driving a truck or out in the front lines for our nation's military, and be grateful, be blessed. And again, thanks for everybody for tuning in. So.